I've been making reference to this ever since the trucking protests have gone on, and all the elected officials that are out there saying, "Oh, it's so terrible. They're just honking all the time, and I want anybody to do something about this." And everybody who has a voice and has a microphone and a podium, and the ear of the mainstream media is out there denouncing them for their horrible actions and their gridlocking Ottawa. And why won't the plebs just go home? Why won't they be so peaceful like those protesters that were out there last year, like the ones that burnt down and vandalized 68 churches across the entire country, instead of just localizing and legitimately peacefully and persistently protesting in the nation's capital, where all of you fuckers congregate. But yeah, would they denounce any of this stuff? No, because it's in the name of the indigenous people, and those are our pet projects, right, Liberal Party? Yeah, exactly. A map of the 68 churches that have been vandalized or burned since a residential school announcement. Yeah, remember, that's what all this stuff about. Those mass graves that were out there, all of those poor indigenous kids that were just mercilessly just killed by the Catholic Church, thrown in these mass graves, and then all of a sudden, using I don't know, above ground technology, they figured out that there are mass graves here. Oh my God, is there any documentation, any of this stuff? Okay, cool. And mass graves just keep popping up. So what do we need to do? We need to start getting rid of statues. We need to start burning down churches because reasons. 68 Christian churches in Canada have been vandalized, burned down, or desecrated since the announcement last month. Okay, this is the most up-to-date article I could find, and again, these vandalizations continued, so again, it's at least 68, and as you can see, that's one of the oldest churches that was, I can't remember exactly where that one was, but it was essentially just burnt to the ground because bad things happened a long time ago. To steal a phrase from another elected official from down south, some people did some things. But yeah, just back to this. 68 Christian churches in Canada have been vandalized, burned down, or desecrated since the announcement last month of a apparent discovery of graves found near a residential school in Kamloops, BC. Remember, that was the initial discovery. 200 and some odd mass graves were found, and it's like, if it's a mass grave, why are they individually annotated? And it's like, all this stuff doesn't make much sense. But no, I elicited the response of some Spurg, and on that initial video, you guys should go check out that thread that's out there, and a guy using Canada with KKK. Oh, it was glorious, and oh, he's never going to see this video, and oh boy, does it feel good to record this, because imagine that, people are just flying off the handle before any of the facts fucking show up. Who could have possibly seen this coming? Since then, 3 other First Nations have announced similar findings in burial sites located near former residential schools. Funny thing about that, what was the follow-up on those ones? I don't know, but to just continue to burn down churches because structural racism. In response to these announcements, far-left radicals have used this opportunity as an excuse to terrorize Catholic and other Christian communities by targeting churches. 25 churches across the country have been lit on fire in the past 2 months. Many of them have been completely destroyed. Here's the list. And of course, I'll link to this because I think that it's important. And remember, Kamloops, BC is right down there. So why did the fires need to stretch all the way up to the Northwest Territories? Why did the one that's closest to me is in Peace River? It's like, that's not terribly close considering the fact that you got Kelowna, you got Kamloops, you got Penticton. This is as far as I've gone. Okay, I've been to Vernon before, but that's as far into British Columbia as I've gone, and that's as far as I care to go. But again, why would you do something over in fucking Newfoundland? That makes zero goddamn sense, especially when all we had to go on was just a report that mass graves were found. Well, about a week ago, a couple weeks ago, I guess at this point, another report came out, and guess what? Not one corpse. Not even one. Nothing was found in the mass grave of Indigenous children in Canada. The entire find that sparked all of this, nothing was there. It was simply, I don't even know. And that's what we're going to try to figure out. What the fuck was this? Okay, again, these schools, if everything that's true about them, they were just snatching kids up and treating them incredibly poorly. I'm glad they're closed, and they have been. Most of them were closed, an overwhelming majority. In fact, nearly 90% of them. I remember some of this stuff. It's a little bit foggy and hazy for most. I guess that's my 25% popping out a bit. Most of them were closed in the 60s. The last one was like quasi-operational, nowhere near running the same way that it was in 1993 or 1997. It was closed before the turn of the millennium, but all of this stuff was done, okay? So again, the questions I was asking at the time, it's like, okay, if there were all of these kids dead, wouldn't you think that their parents would have said something? Wouldn't you think that there would have been some sort of notation of this beforehand, instead of these quasi half-quarter native chiefs coming out just denouncing the racism of the Catholic Church and, you know what, not doing anything to dissuade the burning and the destruction of churches out there, punishing people who did literally nothing wrong, okay? And this sparked Justin Trudeau to come out and apologize for, I don't know, being half Cuban or whatever the fuck he is, saying that Canada needs to do better. Yeah, do better, reporting on the fact that there's nothing there. How about that? Remember last summer when mass graves containing the remains of hundreds of children were found on the grounds of a former government boarding school for Indigenous children in British Columbia, Canada? I know I do. In the 7 months since the shocking news broke, not one body has been found, and not a single shovelful of dirt has been excavated from the site in question. They've done nothing. They achieved what they wanted to. They disrupted institutions, okay? They got their name out there. They had their Black Lives Matter moment. Now, follow-up? No, that's unnecessary. Contrary to the worldwide media coverage last summer, nothing, in fact, has been discovered on the grounds of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. In a healthy society, this would be a scandal. But again, like I said, this came out, and it just came to my attention a few days ago, earlier this week, and I, for the most part, just kind of assumed that this was going to be the case, but it just completely and totally slipped under the radar, mostly because the honker man bad. Story that grabbed headlines for a week and inspired arson attacks and destroyed dozens of churches in Canada turns out to be based on flimsy, unexamined evidence at best and an outright pernicious lie at worst. You might remember the overblown coverage. CNN breathlessly reported what it called a gruesome discovery. So gruesome, in fact, that they needed to follow up on it, right? Well, it's CNN. Of course, they probably had asses to grab and fucking children to go touch and fly out, right? Canadian Broadcasting Corporation are very lovely and responsible. CBC, more on them. When does that video come out? Saturday or Sunday? Stay tuned for that one and what the CBC is concerned with lately. Some of my best work, if I can, pat myself on the back a little bit. Appended a warning on its label to its coverage saying the story contains details that some readers may find distressing because you guys hyped it up. The Washington Post, another beacon for excellence, declared the news of the mass grave had dragged the horror of Canada's mistreatment of Indigenous people back into the spotlight. Like what? Again, in Grand Prairie, we're around several Indian reserves, native reserves, whatever the fuck you want to call them. They're shitholes, but they're well-funded shitholes. And that's another discussion we can have for another day about the entire reserve system, but they seem to do incredibly well in their casinos, raking a lot of fucking cash. So the mistreatment, not in my lifetime, probably not in your parents' lifetime, probably not in your grandparents' lifetime. But at some point in history, they were treated badly. I don't know, something about smallpox blankets or some shit like that. Every corporate outlet, it for granted that a mass grave containing hundreds of corpses had indeed been discovered. Corpses of children, no less. They reported that as fact. Politicians quickly fell in line. Canadian Prime Minister Blackface tweeted that the discovery is a painful reminder of the dark and shameful chapter of our country's history. British Columbia Premier John Horgan, after he wasn't, lashing out against his own constituency and telling them to stay inside, God damn it, don't you know Delta's on the way? Horrified and heartbroken. In the office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Oh yeah, had to consult with their Chinese counterpart or I don't know. The Iraq consulate that's on the, they're on the women's rights panel. A large-scale human rights violation. Yeah, you shouldn't have that much dirt just being stored in your basement. Sucks to suck. And called on Canada and the Vatican to investigate. Now, the Vatican's not interested in dead kids. They like them, alive and kicking, but not too much. Tribal leaders in Canada went further to say the discovery was evidence of mass murder of Indigenous people. Why weren't you guys aware of it? That it was an attempted genocide. Oh my god, some of them compared the priests and nuns who ran the boarding schools to Nazis. Well, they were white after all. Just ask Whoopi Goldberg, implying that, like the Nazis, these people should answer for their crimes. What crimes exactly? Flags were lowered to half-mast. Calls were issued for an inquiry. Yeah, they were lowered for however many days for however many suspected children were there. All of the graves that were there, you know, all of those unfilled graves, all of those unexamined graves. Lamentations of the women, poured forth from Catholic bishops in the church's role in running these government boarding schools in the 1800s. And then came the arson in June. Dozens of churches across Canada, most of them Catholic and some of them more than a century old, were burned to the ground. No church was safe, as the author's colleague Chris Bedford reported at the time in Calgary. 10 churches of various denominations were vandalized in a single night. A few days later, a Vietnamese church was set on fire. Wait, what? Haven't the Vietnamese been through enough, you dirty racists? Just hours after it held its first full service in more than a year. Oh yeah, right, because especially in Alberta, they were just locking up pastors left, right, and center if they were even allowed into their churches. Another reason why Jason Kenney should be kicked over the fucking border if his fat ass would allow it. Overall, more than 24 churches in Canada have now been targeted over the past few weeks, and people are cheering it on. Yep, had to endure all of that. Not because I was necessarily sticking up for any of this stuff. I just wanted to know, okay, cool. If you're saying that all of these kids are dead and something, we should probably have a head count. And then moving on from that, like, what should we do and what should be done about this? Everybody who orchestrated that shit was dead. And like it points out here, one of the largest schools to the Indigenous youth that had operated from the 1890s to the 1970s. So everybody who would have been working at those places are probably either severely retired or dead. So again, this is sins of the father type shit. But the investigation was supposed to continue in conjunction with the British Columbia Coroner's Office. The radar findings were only preliminary, and eventual discovery of the mass grave containing the remains of children as young as 3 years old, which no one seemed to doubt, would confirm what was spoken about but never documented in the community. And again, not documented. It's like you'd think it's like you could forgive some of that stuff in like the 1890s, the turn of the century, but as you got closer to the 1960s, you'd start to wonder. It's like, okay, is anybody taking note of the fact that the basement stinks like really bad? That was more than 7 months ago. Not a single corpse has been exhumed from the site since then. No human remains of children or anyone else have been found and confirmed as a result of the radar search, which, you know, radar search is normally known for producing reliable results when it comes to, you know, searching for bodies. When has anybody else ever heard that working? Literally ever? No, nobody. Bueller? Yeah, that's what I thought. The person who performed the ground-penetrating radar survey, a conflict anthropologist named Sarah Bilyeu, said in a news conference back in July that the probable grave sites, probable, not possible, not potential, probable, they're probably grave sites. It could also probably be a fucking garden box. Could not be confirmed unless excavation were done. Yeah, but we've already burnt the churches and bought all the spray paint. What do you mean? Her investigation only covered only 2 acres of the total 160-acre site and said that she had barely scratched the surface. Okay. Oh, but here, no, there's an admission right here. See, there are dead kids there. There are indeed individual grave sites on the grounds of the Kamloops School. See, justification at last, which includes a still actively used cemetery. Oh, fuck. Children who died from the school when it was still in operation, most of them from tuberculosis, also from influenza, yellow fever, and typhoid. Yeah, it was probably noted down, right? Were sometimes buried in that cemetery in individually marked graves alongside priests and nuns who were also buried there. Oh, like you'd anticipate that happening, right? Okay. The history of this and other residential schools is admittedly complex and includes, as most historical episodes do, a dark side. Not disputing any of that stuff. Often Indigenous children were separated from their families. Separated is a strong word. Ripped from the arms of their parents. That's what the mainstream media was running with, but okay. When children died, the government often refused to pay to have their remains transported back to their communities, so they were buried at the school cemeteries. Many of the grave markers at these schools are now gone, not because anyone was trying to hide them, but because it was common in those remote areas to make grave markers from wood, and many of them simply disintegrated over the years. Yeah, and especially in that part of the world, a lot of rain happens. Okay, a lot of sun, a lot of wind. Sometimes they get snow, but it is, Kamloops area. But I don't necessarily think that they were too up on the technology at the time in the 20s and 30s, especially if these kids were dropping dead of the fucking yellow fever and typhoid. Just saying. What this all suggests, especially in the complete absence of any confirmed evidence of a mass grave or a cover-up, is that the whole story is a giant fiction. Yeah, again, prove anybody wrong on this one. Do the full investigation. All it is right now is just sonar, okay? It's like, oh no, there's graves here. What else have you found? Have you found any biological matter? We found graves. Okay, cool. Do you know if they're graves for sure? We can't confirm that until we dig it up. But we should probably just report that we found mass graves, and maybe, our henchmen, our useful idiots out there will just act accordingly, and we can just shame the entire country into that. Justin Trudeau paid very close attention to the musings of one Barack Obama and figured out if he could have a foothold like Barack Obama did with the black community, if he could have his own race card, if he could have his own cause du jour, he'd be able to have the same type of hypnotic effect on the nation. So, what did he do? Well, he just sparked up that old peace pipe, and then he just adopted the natives like he was born in it, like he was molded in it. It came across as inorganic as these fucking graves are. And you know what? If there are kids buried there, that really does suck, but there's no proof on that. But mainstream media ain't gonna tell you shit about that, and fuck, it barely even registered on my radar, and that should tell you something right there. Intended effect achieved, no further investigations required, right? But paying attention to this, and that's for true. But with that said, thank you all very much for the gift of your time. I've been Don Consuelo. Why don't you follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.